I've talked to Yusuf Fakiri since months after his brother was killed in the Central East Correctional Center in Lindsay, Ontario. His brother was there in December of 2016. He spent 11 days there, and then he was killed. And the family then has wanted to know what happened to their brother Solomon. He's 30 years old. He had a mental illness. And what happened inside that prison is emblematic. How do we treat people with mental illnesses? And for the last number of years, I've been writing and talking to Yusuf Fakiri, who's Soli's brother. I've never met him before, and he's in studio with me, and I saw him, and I got to be candid. I hugged him because we've spent a lot of tearful conversations together, and I just want to welcome you, hand on my heart, Yusuf Fakiri, to Ottawa, and we think about you and your family a lot. So thank you for being here, sir.
It's an honor, Evan. Thanks for having me.
You're here now as part of what has become Justice for Soli, about your brother. Just before we get to today, just remind our listeners about your brother and what your family's gone through.
It's been a nightmare for the last 2 years, more than 2 years. Suleiman was 30 years old when he mercilessly lost his life at the Central East Correctional Center. At the time of his death, according to the coroner, both his legs and his hands were tied. There was 50 bruises on his body. Significant number of these bruises were blunt impact trauma. Suleiman left us, and in those 11 days that we tried to see him, we weren't allowed to see him. They were aware of his illness. And since that day, my family has asked the most fundamental, important question is, why was Suleiman killed under government care? We still have not been given that answer, sir.
And then in the days and years since his death, describe how frustrating it was to get any answers and maybe even more importantly, any accountability.
Well, Evan, we still don't have accountability. We're still asking for the same thing, is we need the individuals that killed Suleiman to be held accountable for what they did. And in terms of getting frustrating answers, you and I have had multiple conversations, time and time again, where my family, through so many avenues and process, were literally, lowballed and not been able to get the important information. And we kept pushing and pushing. And even now, we're still asking, we still don't have the full information.
Since then, so a coroner's report came out, as you say, the extensive injuries to your brother. But then there's new information. The CBC did a documentary about it, and there was new information there because new eyewitnesses. What did you learn from outside investigations, not from the internal investigation?
What we learned is that, it confirmed our worst nightmare. Suleiman was violently beaten to death. What we also learned was some disappointing facts, is how could the initial police force, the Kawartha Lakes Police Service, close the investigation without truly effectively speaking to the eyewitness? How do you close the investigation without speaking to the eyewitness? And getting that information has been incredibly difficult, personally and emotionally, for my family, because Suleiman was one of us. A part of us has been gone since that day, and we miss him dearly.
And has anybody ever been held accountable? Has there been charges against anyone? Anybody been fired? Anything?
We understand that from an employment perspective, the guards that were involved in Suleiman's death have been fired. But the thing is, Evan, you had a mentally ill man that didn't just roll over and die. He died as a result of these guards beating him to death. They have not been held accountable. Charges were not pressed. But thankfully, there's a new police investigation. And this case, Evan, is more than just Suleiman. This is a case that involves all Canadians, and we should all be disturbed. And the main reason my family is speaking out is we want to make sure another mom and dad, another family, does not go through what my family is going through.
When you talk about it, what you've been through is a nightmare. And you never wanted to become an expert on the prison system. You never wanted to be on a national tour talking about justice. Talk about what the Justice for Soli tour is all about tonight, why you're here, and what you want people to understand about our prison system, because this is the story about a Canadian who was under the care of the government for 11 days and couldn't survive 11 days in government care. Couldn't survive 11 days because he was killed. That is the story here, folks. A Canadian killed in government care after 11 days. Imagine that's your family member. What happens on the tour? What do you talk about?
The tour has two mandates. One is to share Suleiman's story, to bring awareness. But just as importantly, is through bringing awareness to Suleiman's story, is to give other families a voice into other families that have lost their loved ones that suffered mental illness in the correctional system. Throughout my tour, I've spoken with Ashley Smith's mom. I've spoken with Cass Geddes' family. I've spoken with, Justin Saint-Amour's family. His inquest is happening effectively today.
Yeah, tell people about those. Those are, we all know about the Ashley Smith story, mentally ill young woman who killed herself. But after they just watched her die, they literally watched Ashley die.
Yes.
What about these other cases? Is this because I don't know if people realize how extensive this is.
You look at the tragic story of Cass Geddes. His inquest was just recently, a couple months ago. A young man that should have been taken to the hospital, instead he was in jail. He was in segregation, suffering from schizophrenia, around the same age of Suleiman. He took his life even though he was on suicide watch. You look at the tragic story of Justin Saint-Amour. His inquest begins today. Had schizophrenia, suffering from a mental illness, was on suicide watch. Guards were aware of his illness. He took his life. What's important when I just mentioned these names, these are sons. These are Canadians. These are kids of mothers. These are people that have hopes and dreams. And when you hear about these stories, your heart breaks because, only certain decisions could have changed their predicament. And unfortunately, because we have not had accountability, and that's what this movement's about, we have to fight so we can make sure that there isn't a Justin Saint-Amour or another Cass Geddes. And all these individuals were held in segregation, and you do not put people in segregation that are suffering from mental illness. It exacerbates their illness. And that's what this tour is about, to make sure that the jails are no longer the new hospitals. It's a national conversation.
It's a national conversation. Tonight, it takes place at Carleton University. Can you tell us exactly where and when, for those of our listeners that may want to go, ask questions, where and when will you be speaking, Yusuf?
I will be speaking at the McAudrium Library at Carleton University and in about half an hour. And we'll be sharing about Suleiman's story and having a discussion with the intersectionality of mental illness and segregation and in the carcerational system.
Just before you go, I want to just say one thing, because I cover a lot of stories in the years since you and I have been speaking and have never had a chance to look each other in the eye. And it means a lot to me that you've come in here. I know you're just half an hour before the event. I should just say that Yusuf is also here with a guy named Justin Pichet, who's a professor and studies our prison system and has been, for me, over the last many years, also a source of an incredible insight. Because, you could define a society by how you treat its prisoners, okay? That's a very important point. And both of these men, for different reasons, care about this. Obviously, a very personal reason for Solomon Fakiri's brother, Yusuf. But I just want to thank you for the courage you've shown in taking this horrific tragedy and fighting for it, but now turning it into something that has, for me, and I think for many others, opened our eyes to something. It doesn't bring back your brother, but it has contributed a lot to how we understand what's going on in the shadows of our world to sons and brothers and fathers and women as well, sisters and moms. So, Yusuf, I thank you. Please check this out at Carleton University tonight. It starts at 5 o'clock. Yusuf, thank you, sir. I really appreciate you coming in. It means a lot to me.
Thank you so much. Great to be here, Evan.
Yeah, that's Yusuf Fakiri, folks.